So, Herb, you worked at NASA for 42 years. You began your career in 1974,
75.
1975, and you worked in the Operations Support Office for the Space Shuttle, correct?
Well, it's that's close. I worked. You can imagine over that long a time, I did a lot of different jobs. So I worked in the Space Shuttle Program Office and the Space Station Program Office, and then even the Orion Program Office for a couple of years. And in fact, I even went back and forth, like from shuttle to station to shuttle to station. And then the last 10 years or so, I spent, that was my operations work, flight operations. So I supported the astronaut office, astronaut training, mission control, operations, flight operations, that kind of thing. So yeah, it's, and they all kind of get mixed together sometimes, but it
Yeah,
was, yeah.
I could imagine how interesting it could be working in so many different sectors. Because NASA Johnson's a very, very big place, and it's held a lot of astronauts and a lot of astronaut training, and it must have
Yes.
been really good for you to be able to work there and um, be a part of it, of all the action of human spaceflight as well, especially. And how did that feel to you?
Oh, it was wonderful. I know, I feel, honestly, I feel very lucky. I think I realized how lucky I was to have a career like that. Not everyone gets to wake up in the morning and look forward to going to work like, like I did, to a, wonderful, challenging, interesting, exciting job. And it was like that to the very end, even after 42 years. My last few weeks there, I never got bored. It was challenging, exciting, interesting, up to the very end. I even after that long, I really only retired because I had just turned 65. And I felt like, well, I've got a lot of other things like this, outreach and volunteering, and I'm on the board of directors of the NASA Alumni League, and I'm even involved in community theater. I do some acting, and I'm on the board of directors for my theater. And so there were just so many other things that I wanted to do, and I thought, well, I'll give someone else a chance to do this work at NASA, and yeah, it was wonderful. It was just as people can imagine that, oh, wow, I would love to have a job at NASA. Yes, for me, it was just as good as you would think it would be.
And what got you interested in working for NASA? Was it a lifelong dream?
Well, no, so that's another interesting story. Uh, I actually grew up just a few miles from what was then the Manned Spacecraft Center. It's now the Johnson Space Center. So I literally in middle school, when they opened the center, it's like 6 miles from my house, and I'm 12 years old. They opened the center, and all of the astronauts, the original astronauts, moved into my community, and so their kids were my classmates and friends in middle school and high school, and so almost every one I knew, their father or parents was an astronaut or had some other job at NASA. So I literally grew up in the now Johnson Space Center community, and was around NASA, from the time I was a teenager. The interesting thing about this is that, believe it or not, I was a business guy, right? I managed contracts. I was not a scientist or an engineer.
No.
And so when I went away to college, I majored in business, and it didn't really occur to me that I might work at NASA sometime, even though I knew so much about it and grew up with it and had so many friends whose parents worked there. And so I'll try to make this short. The interesting thing about this is, back in the early 70s, when you wanted to work for the government, you took a test, and this was 1974, and I'm at the University of Texas finishing my degree, And I was actually, and part of this story is because I had a part-time job helping pay my way through college at the Internal Revenue Service, which is a US government agency. And so that's how I found out about this test that they give. It was called the Professional and Administrative Career Exam, PACE. And I kept hearing how hard a test it was, because this was the test you took if you wanted a professional job with the government. And so when you sign up for the test, you had to pay for the test. You indicated on the form that you filled out with, pen and paper, which cities that had government agencies in them you would be interested in working in if you did well on the test. And so anyway, I took the test. I was shocked to find that I almost aced it. They give you 6 scores in 6 different, categories: aptitude, skill, knowledge, to try to figure out where you would best fit, what job you would be best suited for. And so in those 6 scores, I got 4 100s and 2 98s.
Wow.
And I honestly, when I got the letter, I thought, oh, they must have confused me with someone else. These can't be my scores, right?
Wow.
And so obviously what happened then is NASA contacted me and said, hey, would you like to come interview for a job in our, contract management office? And I thought, oh my gosh, yes, of course. How about today? So again, anyway, it never occurred to me, even having grown up with it, that NASA had people other than scientists and engineers and astronauts and doctors. They had, 1/3 of their employees are business, finance, HR, now today, IT, that kind of thing. So there are about 1/3 of the employees that are not scientists and engineers. And so anyway, I just kind of lucked into my job with NASA. And, boy, it's, again, one of those things about how lucky I feel, having been, and me and all of my high school friends talk about how lucky we were to have grown up at that place at that time.
Yeah.
It was just amazing. It still is. I mean, I'm still in touch with, the kids of Gus Grissom and Tom Stafford and Frank Borman, and those are all my friends.
So, because you are from Austin, Texas, aren't you?
Well, I'm from Houston. I went to school in Austin. Yeah, where the University of Texas is in Austin, which is only about a 3-hour drive from Houston.
So you were very, very close, and deeming by your test scores, you were one of the highly skilled applicants, and so obviously you were the right man for the job.
Yeah, it turned out that way, I guess.
It did indeed.
I feel like I was very successful. And another interesting thing about this I forgot to mention was that, again, having been in the community, when I came down for my interview, the guy who interviewed me was the father of one of my good friends from high school.
Oh, wow.
So I don't know if that helped me
coincidental, I think not.
But, I to be honest, I wasn't surprised that that I knew this person that was assigned to interview me.
Yeah. What did some of the categories include for your test?
Oh, I don't remember. That was, oh my gosh, it was almost 50 years ago, 48 years ago or so that I took that test. Yeah. So I do still have the letter that, but it just shows the scores.
You do?
Oh, yeah. Oh, yeah. I wasn't going to get rid. I think in part it's because no one would ever believe that I got, 4 100s and 2 98s.
Right, yeah. So what were some of your highlights from working at NASA Johnson?
Oh, wow. I could talk for hours. So an interesting thing to me, again, and this is before I even got my job there, was, again, having grown up in the community, when I was still a teenager. Apollo 11 happened during the summer between my junior and senior years in high school.
Yeah.
I was 17. And so it's a long story how I got this job, but I got a job with the television networks, who would come down from their base in New York City. They would fly a cruise down to Houston and rent a mobile home and put it on site there at the Manned Spacecraft Center, and created their studio where they had, camera and a backdrop, and they would bring astronauts and flight directors in and interview them.
Yeah.
And so the thing was, they needed, back then, this is 1969, there's no such thing as videotape or the internet. So if they filmed an interview in Houston, they had to physically move the film from Houston to New York City to be able to show it on television. So they needed someone my main job was twice a day to drive the 100-mile round trip to Intercontinental Airport to put this film on an airplane to fly to New York City.
Wow.
And so I did. So that only took a couple of hours of each day. So I did other, jobs too. Went to the public affairs office and picked up transcripts and photos and press kits and things like that. But again, my main job was to take that film to the airport twice a day. And so one of my favorite stories about that is Apollo 12, which was November 1969. Pete Conrad and Alan Bean walked on the moon. Dick Gordon stayed in the command module. And so when at the end of that mission, Pete Conrad, who, of course, just lived, 5 miles from the Space Center, they wanted, and this wasn't going to be national news, it was just local human interest kind of thing. They wanted, when the capsule splashed down at the end of the mission into the Pacific Ocean, his family was in their living room watching on television. And so they asked me to go to his home, Pete Conrad's home, with the cameraman to be there while he's filming this, watching the Pete Conrad's family watching on their television set in their living room as the capsule splashed down into the ocean. And so I remember that day. It's burned into my memory. Again, that was over 50 years ago. I still remember standing in that room with his. I mean, I'm standing up against the wall out of the way. I'm not sitting on their sofa, right? But I'm in the same room with them watching on their television set. And so I still remember when the cameraman finished filming, he put the film in a dark bag to keep it from getting light on it, put it in a canister, handed me the canister. I got in my car, drove back to the Space Center. There was a helicopter waiting for me. They were in such a hurry to get this film. And again, it didn't have to go to New York because it was just for human interest for Houston, to the local television station. So there was this helicopter, and I'd never been in a helicopter before. I'm 17 years old. And so I, run and get in. And I remember the pilot, he had just come back from Vietnam. He had flown missions in Vietnam. And so he's, I'm hanging on, for dear life. And he's just zooming down the interstate, towards downtown Houston where the TV studio was. And I still remember getting out of the helicopter and going in to the television station, and there was a big counter. And I remember there was a woman standing back there. She was waiting for me. She knew I was coming with this film. And I handed her the film, and I don't remember anything after that. It was like the adrenaline just drained out of my body. I don't even remember the helicopter ride back to my car. The hour or so before that, I remember it like it was this morning.
Yeah, you seem to have been highly respected then. Obviously being able to go to the crew family's home and watch them splash down in the Pacific, which is obviously used nowadays for crewed missions from SpaceX.
Right. And so again, that was before I even started my job at NASA. And so then and I'll try to go through these quickly. I know you didn't want to have a too long video here. One of the first things I worked on after I started my professional job at NASA was these space shuttle orbiter vehicles. I worked on the contract with Rockwell International to build the space shuttle orbiter vehicles. And so this is actually a model they gave me.
Oh, wow.
In kind of appreciation for working with them. And you might notice that the external tank is
white.
And so that's a sign that this is an old model, because only the first two shuttle flights had white external tanks.
Yeah,
The last,
I remember STS-1 being the first shuttle test flight where they put 2 men on board, and
yeah,
the whole external tank was white.
yeah, yeah,
But then they
yeah.
realized that the white paint obviously wasn't good for re-entry, and so they kept it as
Well,
orange.
actually, the story is that it's what was inside the tank was supercooled liquid hydrogen and liquid oxygen,
Yeah,
and they thought they needed the paint to protect it from the ultraviolet rays of the sun that would warm it. And they realized after 2 flights that they, in fact, didn't need that extra paint to protect it from the ultraviolet rays, and so it saved, whatever, I can't remember now, 600 pounds or 600 gallons of paint. So they
yeah,
just left it its natural orange color after that.
yeah, because they're doing the same for the Artemis launch vehicle for
Right,
SLS. They're keeping it as the plain orange external tank.
right, right, right.
And obviously they're refurbishing all the old RS-25s from the space shuttle to use on the solid rocket boosters. And then obviously the solid rocket boosters are the same as the shuttles.
Yes, yes,
So it's
that's right.
exactly alike. It's the same kind of thing.
Yeah,
Um,
so that's, I get to tell people I bought the space shuttles, well, the space shuttle orbiter vehicles. Again, there were
yeah,
separate contracts for the main engines and a separate contract for the external tank and a separate contract for the solid rocket boosters. But my group was buying the orbiter vehicles for about $2 billion each. And so I was traveling out to California where they were building them about once a month for about a year or two.
where were they building these? Because I've never seen where
In
these
a
orbiters were
place
built.
called Palmdale, California. It's near Los Angeles.
Ah,
It's
right.
so out on the west coast of the U.S. But yeah, they have a big plant where they built the same plant where they built all of the space shuttle orbiter vehicles.
Right, yeah. And there were how many of them?
Five, I think.
I think there were, because you had Discovery, you had Endeavour, you had Columbia, you had Challenger, and
Atlantis.
Atlantis. That was it.
Yeah. And well,
Um,
in Enterprise was the first one that never flew in orbit, but they used it for the approach and landing tests off the
yeah.
back of it, right?
So there's technically 6, but only
Yeah,
only
right.
5 were orbital flown.
Yes, yes. I
Um,
think that's why I get confused. Does that one count or not? Right.
yeah. Well,
Yeah.
we can count it. I don't think anyone's going to judge us for counting it as a
Right.
shuttle.
Yeah, yeah. Well, and
um,
so that makes me think of another one of my favorite stories. So Fred Hayes flew those approach and landing tests in the Enterprise, and I've become friends with him. Of course, I didn't know him at the time, but we were both at the Manned Spacecraft Center, Johnson Space Center, while I was just starting my career. And then he retired from NASA in like 1972 or 4 or something like that. And so fast forward to the mid 80s, I'm working in the space station program office, and we needed an engineering support contract to support the space station program office. And so they sent me actually to the Kennedy Space Center, where I spent a year working this special project to award this, what turned out to be a 10-year, $1 billion engineering support contract that Grumman Aerospace Company won the competition. And so when they won, they appointed Fred Hayes, the Apollo 13 lunar module pilot, to be where he had gone to work, to be the president of their new space station program support division. And so he and I negotiated this contract. And so Fred Hayes signed the contract for Grumman, and I signed the contract for NASA. And so we worked together for about 2 years there in the mid 80s. And then I got transferred to a different office in downtown Washington, D.C. at NASA headquarters. And then actually the whole space station program changed, and it became the International Space Station with Russia involvement. And so that contract kind of went away.
Because
Anyway,
obviously Roscosmos signed with NASA, didn't they?
Yes, yeah. Yeah, so anyway, I got to know Fred, and so he and I both moved back to Houston, and so I'm even friends with his son and one of his granddaughters now. I
Wow.
still see him around, Houston every once in a while. So anyway, getting to work with one of the Apollo 13 astronauts and become friends with him is definitely one of the highlights of my career.
Yeah, that must have felt really special.
Yeah.
Did you ever get to meet Jim Bridenstine?
Yes, I did. December of 2019, just before the pandemic hit, I was at a NASA social event in New Orleans. I have a photo on my Instagram or Twitter or something like that of me with him. And yeah, so yes, I did. I actually got to meet over my career several NASA administrators.
Nice. And finally, before this meeting ends, is there anything or any advice you'd give for anyone aspiring to work for people like Northrop Grumman or NASA?
Yes, so I do get asked that question frequently, and my answer is don't be afraid to fail. If you want to do whatever it is that you want to do, go for it. I think a lot of people miss out on not just working for an aerospace company or NASA, but a lot of people miss out on a lot of things in life because they're afraid, someone may wonder why they're doing that, or they're afraid of they may not be accepted or afraid of failing. And it's interesting that phrase, failure is not an option, is a very popular phrase that attributed to Gene Kranz, the flight director who was directing the flight and mission control when Apollo 11 landed on the moon. And also he was one of the flight directors that saved Apollo 13. And so he actually never said failure is not an option. It was a line that was created for the Apollo 13 movie that was just written into the script. And so now he uses it all the time. He even titled his book "Failure is Not an Option." Anyway, I'm kind of getting off track, but I'm saying all of this because, okay, that's fine if you're trying to save the lives of 3 astronauts. Failure is not an option, but for everything else, failure is an option. It's a requirement. The old saying, if you're not failing, you're not trying hard enough. So anyway, I'm going on and on, but that's, I just see it so often that people want something and for whatever reason, they're afraid to go for it. And so I say, go for it.
Well, thank you very much for chatting to me today, Herb, and I look forward to keeping up to date with you in the future. Thank you very much.
That's great.
Cheers.
Wonderful
Bye-bye.
talking to you. Thanks. Bye.